Okay, we're on Shamanism 111, and we're going to talk about patriarchy, penises, power, and the inverted pyramid. So, first of all, we are all living in this culture where we receive these cultural imprints about what power looks like. And I think this is coming back to this understanding that we are in the Western culture placing an overemphasis on what we can see rather than what we can feel. So we are a bit mental in our judgmentalness about the world that we live in, that we focus on these sort of external or visible things. So symbols of success in the modern world are things like stuff, yachts, expensive suits, houses, cars, having a private jet, whatever. It can also be these external sort of diplomas, badges, memberships, ranks, titles, and privileges. Now, what I want you to notice is that most of these sort of external signs of success can be bought. So we then have to talk about the power of money, because most forms of modern power are tied to money, and so money is seen as a powerful energy in itself. And I'm not going to argue that, and I'm not going to object to it. But what I am going to say is that money is not a guarantee of power. And really, what is important is how money is being used. That's what really matters. But we have to talk about consumption and this idea that, the sovereign consumer, the person who shops themselves into existence, um, the Western lifestyle, consumerism, which is an economic and social system that encourages the consumption of goods and services as a means of attaining well being. And this pattern of intensified consumption became particularly visible in the 17th century in London, where the gentry and the prosperous merchants took up residence and promoted a culture of luxury and consumption that then slowly extended across socioeconomic boundaries. Marketplaces expanded, like shopping centers, like the New Exchange that opened in 1609 in the Strand, and shops started to become more and more important as places for Londoners to meet and socialize and take over. Like the shops themselves became sort of popular destinations alongside events like the theater, for example. So how does consumerism work? Well, obviously it's about money. So we have businesses or brands that produce innovative products that are really far from basic requirements. And so the basic tool of business is, or the basic way of business is to solve a problem. And we don't have that many problems anymore, one might argue. So sometimes these businesses actually invent problems. Like, for example, needing the body to look a certain way so that we buy all these, or like, cellulite being a problem. Again, creating these visual cues about what we should look like. And then from those visual imperfections, whatever, I'm not calling cellulite an imperfection, but you know what I mean, that we then have to buy these creams and things to get rid of those problems. So creating a demand for the products or our solutions by manipulative advertising, and then having people buy them out of obsession and mindless consumption. So it's also been this kind of push in consumerism to make it easier and easier and easier to buy stuff without having to think about it. So moving from having a tangible exchange, with physical money, to credit cards, and now to just to dip with your phone, or as they're doing now in some places where you just have a little chip in your hand. So you just dip with your hand, and then you basically don't have to think about what you're exchanging for the goods. And obviously, when you buy something, you then have a sort of sense of happiness for a moment. And this is the sort of consumerist wheel that goes around, because it's not going to be a satisfaction that lasts for a long time. And so eventually, you're going to have to buy more. So, really, unnecessary resources that we're using for the sake of pleasure. And I like this quote here: our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption a way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption, that we need things, we need to consume, we need to be burned up and replaced and discarded at an ever accelerating rate. So the question to ask yourself is, are these things really better than the things that I have? Or am I just being trained to be dissatisfied with what I have now? And the fantasy is that Western consumerism, far from being intrinsically implicated in systemic global inequalities, could solve them. And that all we have to do is buy the right product. And people get identified with their consumption. So, for example, like I'm a vegan, or I'm a little bit better than people because I buy Lululemon pants, or whatever it is. None of it makes any sense, and none of it is based in reality. Another thing that we need to talk about within this kind of consumption culture and external forms of power is privilege, rank. And so we forget about privilege and rank and power as soon as we have them, but the divide is massive, and we do not all start in the same position. And there's a few reasons for that. I don't know exactly what it was that convinced some humans who are maybe on the lighter spectrum when it comes to the color of their skin, but maybe we're darker when it comes to the spectrum of their souls, to put themselves above other humans and think that the other humans had a lower value just based on their appearance, or the part of the world that they came from. Enslaving other humans, stealing their resources, and there's some great work that you can find on YouTube talking about how the West basically sustains itself by stealing resources from the poor countries that they pretend to help. Here's another image that I think is quite striking. This one is from Canada, where this lost generation, or the stolen generation, which happened to most Aboriginal countries in the colonized world, where the government went in and stole their children to try to see if they could change, or beat the savageness out of them, for example. And I mean, imagine these mothers and these parents and the powerlessness that they had in the face of these, excuse me, but fucking demonic entities that thought that they could come in and take their kids and westernize them or civilize them or whatever. Like, it's just, I'm enraged thinking about this, and I really fucking hope that you are as well, because this was and is and continues to be wrong. So when we compare then, our journey to others, especially when we have that kind of rank and privilege because we are looking a certain way on the outside, or, we've been born into a certain family, for example, we see a few obstacles in our path and we look around and we think, well, what's the difficulty? And I remember seeing a great documentary, and I don't remember the name of it now, it was a long time ago, with rich kids basically going to poor countries, and a guy saying, oh, being poor is a choice. And then they took all his money, they took all his privileges, and he had to hang out with the poor people in the slum in India. And at the end he said, no, being poor is not a choice. Being poor is enforced by certain people who refuse to let us move up. So through his own experience of what it was like to be stuck in that place, he finally understood. And a lot of us do this, right? Like, we'll sort of sit there on our white privilege and say, well, I don't see race, I'm a good person, I think everybody's the same. And what we say when we say that we refuse to see race is that I am going to use my place of privilege to refute and deny the sufferings of those who don't have the white privilege that I have, at the same time erasing their personal and cultural history. So when we start to come into this and we start looking at rank and privilege and power, we have to understand where we stand in the race ourselves. We have to understand how we're playing the game. Because privilege isn't just wealth or opportunity. Privilege is seeing yourself reflected everywhere in the places of power, giving yourself the opportunity to imagine yourself, to let your visionary speak to you about what can happen, where you can go, and not doubting it for a second because you can see it. It's real already. Whereas imagine growing up and not having any role models that look like you anywhere. So this is a nice little bingo that you can have a look at. So basically, if you can check all these boxes, then you belong to the highest privilege group on the planet. You could probably pause the video here if you want to go through it. But it's just good to be really, really, really clear and aware of your privilege and understanding where you stand in the wheel of power. And this is another bingo, same idea. You can also have a look at this circular graph where, you can see the inner circle of power and then towards the outer circle of power. So all of us in the spiral who are on the neurodivergent spectrum, for example, we're not in the inner circle of being neurotypical. You can see they're in the green. For example, I think so far most of us are on the spectrum of being white. So we're in the inner circle when it comes to skin color. Most of us are obviously speaking English, which means that in the language sense of power, we are in the inner circle. Everybody who's joining the spiral is able to pay for it, which means that we are part of the middle or upper class when it comes to financial power. So understanding that we live in this system of capitalism where there are two categories of people, those who have and those who have to work. And so these kind of ideas, right, of like, what does it mean to be rich? What does it mean to be poor? And that it's not just a mindset. So you can see here on the left this illustration of, these walls that separate the rich in their mansions from the poor in the ghetto. And then to the right, you have this, rich man, give him $1,000 and he'll come back with $100,000. Give a poor man $1,000 and he'll come with an iPhone. Here you have another illustration of this where people will give to the rich. And I remember, I think it was Oprah Winfrey or somebody like that, who said, when she had no money, nobody would give her anything. And then she became rich, and now, companies are fighting to give her stuff. Whereas, a poor beggar is lucky if they get some coins out of us. Another time when we really saw this was obviously during COVID and how people were being treated differently and what they could afford. For example, if you wanted to stay in your power and not take the vaccine, that was also really a class issue and amount of power issue, because some people could not afford to go against the mandates, and other people, had the choice, like myself, in a place of power financially, that I'm not dependent on a work to tell me what to do and whether or not I have to inject something that I don't want in my body. So again, I'm going to come back to this cartoon and show you an example of reality here. So you can see to the right of the screen a real example of this kind of ghetto and suburbia with the upper middle classes on the other side. So let's talk about patriarchy, penises. Because I wish I had a penis, because then I'd fuck you, patriarchy, and steal your job. So penises are a big part of the patriarchy, and this kind of upside down penis, right, is turned into a inverted pyramid. So this is an example of the grandiosity of the patriarchy. This is a building in China. It looks just like a penis, and it's hilarious because at night they send out fireworks from the top, so it really looks like an ejaculating penis. So why is the patriarchy an inverted penis? Why do they keep wanting to make these big dicks all over the world? Well, because it's an inverted pyramid scheme. Check this out. So in the ancient Egyptian society, it really is a pyramid structure where most of the people were kept poor, moving up to, the one, the dick on top, the pharaoh who considered himself to be the god, the king, and one. And then, more and more and more and more people until you get to the bottom where, is the rest, or the people. But also really understanding that the patriarchy is for dicks. Um, all the people who really benefit from the patriarchy are men. And there's another statistic about, the richest people on the planet, and they're all men except for like 3. And those women didn't create their own wealth. They actually inherited it from either husbands or fathers. So, yeah, it's not equal in any way, shape, or form. So when we're talking about, the patriarchy, we're talking about this kind of systems that are in our, or the culture in these systems of, repressing women. So I've put this pyramid as well. I've also found a pyramid representing the society in ancient Greece, where women really were in the lowest part of the pyramid. Women were slightly above slaves, but it was really a society for men. So here's that in a simpler way. And this is really today, where again we live in this fucking penis. Here's the pyramid that shows you the disempowerment in yoga. I think that even if you're not super into yoga and the yoga scene, you can see this and look at it from the sort of guru and toxic shamans and these people, the spiritual leaders. So where we start from, being dependent on our teachers, moving up into, assaults and abuse at the top. So anything that falls into this is going to be toxic. So coming out of the patriarchal pyramids and these inverted penises where they're trying to have a hard on and make it hard for all of the rest of us to coexist in a healthy way, moving into this kind of matriarchy or cyclical system where we're all equal and we're moving around rather than up and down. So I want to talk about this as well, this pyramid, and I'm sure you've seen it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which kind of go with the chakras in a way, and the colors of the chakras at least. So we're starting, at the root with our physical safety, feeling secure, love and relationships, self-esteem, and then self-actualization at the top. And I recognize very much in myself and my story that I didn't do this journey at all, because even though, yes, to some extent I had the physical needs met as a child, I didn't feel safe at all where I grew up. I didn't feel love and belonging with my family, for example. I didn't have self-esteem, but I was focused at the top of the pyramid right away. And so what I want to say with that is I don't believe that this is a pyramid at all, because I have personal experience from people coming from, quote unquote, poorer or less developed nations. If you look at, again, these the money thing as the sort of most important thing, whereas those undeveloped nations can actually be very, very developed when it comes to spirituality. So they sort of start at the top of the pyramid, or maybe they're, I just don't think that this is the right way to describe it. I think this is more of a logical way to describe it, that we're working on all aspects of ourselves all at the same time. It's all at the same time. So in that kind of medicine wheel, we're spinning through the seasons. There is no point to go. And so understanding that the wholeness, maintaining balance, has to come from working with all of our parts at the same time, or giving them equal value at least. So join me on this journey to power, so that we can have enough power that we're able to smash the patriarchy. And just the last little note here, that if any of this, looking at your own privilege, looking at your own power that you were given at birth, if it makes you uncomfortable, sit with it. There's a meditation practice in the Buddhist Vajrayana tradition that's called sitting with impermanence. And this means that we're meditating on losing anything and everything. And it's a way of examining our attachment to worldly items and the aspects of our lives. Discomfort is the mother of change. It helps us adapt to grief. It intensifies what's important, and it helps us develop compassion for those with less. Sitting with our discomfort is not an easy exercise, but when we are able to imagine the loss of a loved one, a relationship, a treasured item, or even the loss of our own life, we understand what is truly needed to change. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I will see you in part 3.